Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Yoma, and today is our fourth lesson. And today we are going to be reviewing Daf 24, Chaf Dalid, through 30, Daf Lamed. And wishing everyone a Chodesh Tov, whoever's in Israel and outside of Israel in a few hours. So Chodesh Tov to everyone. Okay, we are going to actually finish the second chapter of Masechet Yoma today and begin the third. And last week we left off with the avodah. I'm going to use the word avodah. Avodah means the service, the service that was done in the temple. And avodah, in Hebrew, the word avodah really means work, but it's a specific work that was done in the temple and with sanctity. So we're going to talk about the service called Trumat Hadeshen, which we left off last week discussing. You can see here on the picture where the Kohen, the priest, takes with a shovel some of the ash from the top of the altar and brings it down to a point to the east of the altar, of the ramp of the altar, and this was called Trumat Hadeshen. So our Gemara on Daf 24 begins by asking how much of the ash is removed. And since there's this idea that it's called Trumat Hadeshen from the word Truma, we are going to have two different opinions. Is it like regular Truma and therefore it's 1/10 of whatever's there? Or is it a different type of truma, which is 1/500th? And the Gemara says no. Another option is like a kometz, a handful. And this is really the conclusion of the Gemara, that only a small amount, as you can maybe see here on the picture, only really a small amount is taken off of the altar. From here, the Gemara continues on 24, and we're going to get into a longer discussion about who needs to do the different services, the different avodot in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. As we know, in general, if there is a sanctified service, that needs to be done by the priests. It's the priest's job to work in the temple, and they need to do almost all or many of the different services that were done in the temple. The Gemara here on 24 discusses what happens if a non-Kohen does one of these actions or services. What happens to him? And the Gemara says that there are 4 actions that if a non-Kohen does it, he actually is liable to death. And here you can see on the picture, zrika, which is the application of the blood on the altar, haktara, which is burning of the incense, nisuch hamayim, or yayin, which is the pouring the libations of water on Sukkot, or wine throughout the year. So those are the 4 that everyone agrees to. And then there's a difference of opinion if Trumat Hadeshen, you can see here at the bottom, if removing the ash is one of these services that a non-Kohen is not allowed to do. And therefore, there is this machloket if it's considered an action, a service, again, or not. It's definitely an action, but does it have sanctity, and therefore can only be done by a Kohen, by a priest. And here the Gemara explains what is the basis, what's the fundamental disagreement. One option is that anything that is an application, putting something on to the altar, that would be something that a priest needs to do. But maybe taking something off the altar, that's less important, maybe, and therefore a non-priest could do that action. Levi says, no, that was Rav's opinion. The second opinion is no, anything that has to do with the altar is sanctified and therefore must be done by the priest. And that is the difference of opinion here. The Gemara continues on 24 and says, again, maybe we're talking about things that are done maybe only inside the temple as opposed to in the courtyard. Maybe removal within the temple itself, meaning in the heichal, in the sanctuary. Removal over there would be an issue, but maybe removal of the ashes is less of an issue, and therefore a non-priest would be able to do this service. And again, the Gemara goes back and forth. What other activities or actions could a non-Kohen, a non-priest, do? The Gemara goes through all different ideas, and it concludes with one other disagreement. What about putting the wood onto the altar? Is that considered a sanctified service and therefore must be done by a priest, or not necessarily and can be done by a non-priest? Again, the Gemara at the bottom of 24 discusses that a non-priest would be liable for putting blood onto the altar. And the Gemara says that the same with the blood if it's from an animal, from a bird. The same thing with pouring wine or water onto the altar. And this would be a support, again, for Levi. And again, going back and forth. At the bottom of 24, we discuss the lottery again. Remember, we started discussing last week that there were 4 lotteries. We're going to go through, last week we did the first one, and here we're going to continue with the second one in a minute on the next daf. And there's a fascinating discussion at the bottom of 24, which is, what were the priests wearing when they did the lottery? Were they wearing their priestly clothing so that they could right away do the service? Or, well, the problem with that is that maybe if somebody didn't win, maybe he would run up and do it anyway. So maybe they said, oh, no, you should wear your weekday clothes and then change only when you won the lottery. Again, or do we say, oh, everyone should be wearing their weekday clothes, but then what's the problem? Now I have to wait for the priest to go and change his clothes in order to do the service. So again, that is a machloket, a disagreement. And then at the top of 25 as well, there's a source that they changed when they won the lottery. Or maybe the source is saying, oh, no, the people who changed were the people who didn't win the lottery. They needed to change out of their priestly garbs because they weren't going to do the service. I see Lynn asked a question. Always confused about the Eish Tamir, the third, the fire with no purpose, like the one on the incense or the one offering. Is ash taken from that also? Is that before? Oh, okay. We're going to discuss, Lynn, excellent question. Lynn is referring to the different pyres that are on top of the altar. We're going to discuss it later on in this Masechet, but right now the idea is we're taking the ashes off of the main fire where the sacrifices were placed. So that is what we're discussing, and not from the other fires. We're going to talk about them later on in the Masechet. Okay, from here on Daf 25, we discuss that when they did the lottery, they did it in the chamber that's called Lishkata Gazette. That's the circle that's circled at the top and like on the 3D model, and at the bottom you see it again on the north side. I like these pictures because they do it properly. The north is in the north and the south is on the bottom. So that's where what's circled, and the arrow is called Lishkata Gazette, which really means the chamber of stone. And that is where they did the lottery and where they started counting. The Gemara describes how one of the Kohanim, the priests, one of them would take off his head his hat, basically, and he would be the one that they started the count from. That's how they would know who they counted from. And then there's a beautiful discussion here how the mothers of the priests would make their children, they would weave the clothing for their children who are priests. In order to beautify the mitzvah. So I thought it was just a beautiful image of the mothers making the clothing that their children will use in the temple. The Gemara discusses that this chamber was half in the courtyard, in the temple courtyard, which is sanctified, and half outside of the temple courtyard, which is not sanctified. And therefore, it was like half and half. And that is where they would stand in order, the priest would stand on the sanctified side, on the southern side, for the lottery. Okay, from here we're going on to the next lottery, lottery number 2. This is going to be the actual, I don't want to say that, but I would say the actual sacrifice of the Korban Tamir, of the daily offering. And the Gemara discusses here on 25 that they're going to do the lottery. This is going to have many different people winning this lottery. The first person is going to be the person who's going to slaughter the animal. The second is the person who's going to put the blood onto the altar. Then the third is going to be on the bottom right. You can see a picture of it. The person who's going to remove the ashes from the golden altar on the inside. This is the altar where they put the incense. And the next person is going to be the person who's going to clean out the candelabrum, the menorah. And finally, the priests that are going to bring the different parts of the animal and place them on the bottom half of the ramp leading up to the altar. One would think that they would just bring it all up at one time, but the Gemara says no. Actually, the Mishnah says that it was done in 2 stages. Stage number 1 was putting all the pieces on the ramp. Stage number 2 was later on bringing it up onto the altar. So here, this is for the non-vegetarians. This just shows you the different parts of the sacrifice and how each part was carried by a different priest. So the Gemara discusses the head, and they actually here. Again, thank you to Daf HaChaim, which I took these pictures from. He actually color-coded the different parts that go together, right? So the head and the back leg, and then the 2 forelegs, and then the tail and the other leg, and then the chest, and then the neck, and then the flank, and then the innards, which you don't see here. And there's actually, and then the flour and then the wine. And the Gemara tells us that this is all done by 13 different priests. Each one had his job of what he was going to carry, and each one brings his thing to the altar, to the ramp. There is a difference of agreement as to what the order is, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The Gemara continues on Daf 25 about the Gemara asks, is it a lottery for only we just mentioned many things. Is it a lottery for just one of these things? And then everybody next to that person kind of gets the next thing, right? So if Kohin number 4 wins, then number 5 gets the next job and number 6 gets the next job? Or is there a lottery for each one of these jobs? It does seem to imply, the Gemara seems to imply that there's only one lottery to see where we start, and then everybody after him gets the next job in order. Because as we mentioned, there really only are 4 lotteries. So if this is going to be for 13 priests, that would mean there would have to be 13 lotteries, which we know that there aren't. So it seems that it was only one. The Gemara says no, maybe it was considered one lottery, but maybe they did it, each time to see which Kohen, which priest was going to do which avodah, which service. Okay, from here, the Gemara talks about the ktoret, the bringing of the incense, and how the question is, this needed 2 priests. You can see here the priest on the right holding the thing that looks like a cup. He's holding the incense. The priest on the left is holding a shovel, and that's called a machta, and that has burning hot ashes, or burning hot coals that are placed on the altar, and then the priest with the incense pours the incense on top of the coals. So again, here you see, again, the question here is it one lottery for 2 people, or is it, again, 2 lotteries, one for each person? Okay, from here the Gemara mentions the kior, the wash basin. This picture was taken from a really great book that was put out of like digitalized pictures of the temple. So here you can see a really nice, I guess, like a visualization of what the wash basin looked like. And the Gemara describes on 25 how it used to have only 2 spouts, and then they changed it to have 12 spouts, so that all the Kohanim doing the temple service that had to do with the Korban Tamir, with the daily sacrifice, could wash their hands together. Now, we just said 12, but if you remember, we just said a few minutes ago that there were 13 priests that were involved. Who's number 13? The Gemara says number 13 is really number 1. He is the person who's going to shecht the animal. He's the person who's going to slaughter the animal. He did not have to wash his hands and feet, and therefore all the other priests did, and therefore you get 12. Okay, from here the Gemara discusses, as I mentioned, there's a difference of opinion. What is the order of the different parts of the animal? And again, on one hand, one can say, what does it really matter? On the other hand, I think it's interesting to think about what are they really arguing about. So let's see what's the basis of the argument, and then we can kind of delve a little deeper, right? So the Gemara says that the orders of the parts of the animal is either how it walks, right? And therefore you go right from front to back, right? Because an animal walks in general forward, or the way it's skinned. Again, an animal is generally, I think, skinned from the back to the front, and maybe that's the difference of opinion, or maybe it's how is it cut up, right? Meaning, again, the order when you cut up the animal, versus maybe it goes by quality. Maybe we should put the choicest part on top first. Maybe it should have the part that has the most meat, or maybe it's the part that is the fattiest. So I think there's a lot more. Again, on one hand, we can dismiss this argument as just being, technical and everyone having a difference of opinion. I think on the other hand, maybe there's something deeper here, right? When we're bringing the animal onto the altar, right? We want to bring, what are we doing, I think is the question, right? Are we saying, I want to bring the best pieces of meat first because it's about the meat? Are we saying that, no, the animal, it's as if the animal is walking up the altar, right? It's presenting itself to the altar. I think there are different ways to look at what is the significance of animal sacrifices. And I think there's a lot there. I think that definitely in modern times, in our sensitivities, it's hard to connect to animal sacrifice. But I think when we think about it as this animal is almost a replacement of us, right? Meaning we want to put ourselves on that altar. But we can't, or we don't want to go that far. So we send this animal up in our stead. How do we send it up? Right? Do we send it up head first? Do we send it up best cut first? And I think that's really the idea behind this difference of opinions. The Gemara does at the bottom of 25 say the head is always first, even though it doesn't have so much meat on it, and therefore it's always joined with the back leg, which does have a lot of meat on it. So there's that balance. At least everyone agrees. Okay, the Gemara on Daf 26 starts off as a continuation of this discussion that we also want to be very respectful of the animal. So what do? We place the fat on top of basically where the animal was slaughtered, right? When you're bringing up the head, so there's the place that it was severed, where the head was severed, we cover it with the fat to be respectful of the animal. So again, thinking about it, this animal's already cut up in pieces. We still want to show respect, and I think that that's something that is very important. Okay, the Mishnah on 26 tells us that the third lottery, the picture I showed you before, let me see here. This is the third lottery, which is who is going to bring the Ktoret. And here the Mishnah says that it was only for priests who have never done it before. And the Gemara is going to explain why in a minute. Number 4 is going to be the fourth and final lottery. Is going to be either new or old priests, and that is going to be bringing the limbs up to the altar, up to the fire. So the Gemara here on 26 explains that the person who brought the incense, the ktoret, only, right, you could only do it once. Why? Because it was known that if you brought the incense, it would bring wealth to the person who is bringing it. And therefore, they wanted to make sure that to basically spread the wealth, literally, and have different priests do it every day. Okay, the Gemara now asks if there is a lottery in the afternoon. We know, so we just discussed the morning service, which again nowadays is our morning prayer. That is parallel, right? Our morning prayer is parallel to the tamid of the morning. The Gemara now asks, was all of this done again in the afternoon for the afternoon sacrifice of the tamid, which for us is the afternoon prayer, mincha? Or, right, so one option is it's not done again. It's the same priest who did the service in the morning. They're going to do it in the afternoon. The Gemara says that there is another lottery in the afternoon for the Ktoret. Again, for burning of the incense, as we mentioned, that cannot be repeated by the same priest, and therefore it needed another lottery. The Gemara says, well, also on Shabbat, there needed to be another lottery because of the shift change. If you remember, every family of Kohanim had a shift of a week, and that was the shift change was on Shabbat. So the priests that were there in the morning were not the priests that were there in the afternoon. And therefore, there needed to be a lottery in the afternoon. Or the Gemara says maybe they did the second lottery in the morning, right? You had to come to work early. They did the lottery in the morning, and then you knew your job in the afternoon. One second. Okay. Next machloket, which again I think has a beautiful idea fundamentally. As we mentioned before, um, it seems to be that there were different Kohanim, different priests who brought up the limbs from the ramp onto the fire. And here the Gemara asks, right, is it the same people or is it different people? Why? What's behind this? So one option is we want more people doing work in the temple. Again, when I say work, I mean the temple service. The more, the merrier, as we say, and therefore, right, it brings more glory to God, right? There's a saying, "Berov am hadrat melech," right? We sanctify, we beautify, we glorify the king with many people, right? When many people show up, it's more respectful to the king, again, being God. Or maybe it should be the same priests, because maybe it will look like, oh, they're being lazy, right? What happened to those guys? Oh, they're on a break now. Let's bring new guys, right? So, the idea is maybe it should be the same priest to show that they want to do the complete service. So that is the machloket. Okay, next Mishnah is going on Daf 26. We're going to discuss as we mentioned before, the Korban Tamid. That is a Korban that was brought every day. We said that it needed a certain number of Kohanim. So here the Gemara delineates each sacrifice and how many priests it needs. So it says that the Tamid was brought anywhere between 9 and 12 priests, no more and no less. And here, when I'm saying brought, I mean the actual bringing to the altar, not the other avodot, not the other services surrounding it, but actually carrying the pieces of the animal. So the Gemara says every day it's 9 priests, 5 to carry the limbs, 1 for the innards, and 2 for the menachot, the additional things that are brought, and 1 for the wine libation. On Sukkot, we add another priest because the other priest is going to bring the water libation. So that's 10. In the afternoon, it's actually 9 to carry, again, 9 to carry the animal, plus 2 priests that are going to bring up the wood, the pieces of wood that are put on in the afternoon. On Shabbat, you also have 2 priests who are going to bring the 2 cups of frankincense that are put on the table for the showbread. And therefore, if it's Shabbat, and then if it's on Sukkot, so then you have 1 more, and that's how you get 12. So basically, anywhere from 9 to 12 are going to be working on the Korban Tamid. The Gemara describes a very dramatic story. First, it says that the water libation that happens on the top of the altar on Sukkot, during Sukkot, needed to be poured into a special silver bowl that was on the top of the Mizbeach, of the altar. And the Gemara says, or describes, that one time a tzduki, right, the Sadducee, remember the sect of Jews in those days who did not accept the oral law, and this tzduki actually poured the water onto the floor. And what did they do since it was Sukkot? What do people have in their hands on Sukkot? They have etrogim, right? The etrog. They threw their etrogim at this tzduki, and it was a very terrible scene, definitely dramatic. And the Gemara actually uses this as a proof that this was done in the morning because they were holding their etrogim, which is part of the prayer service in the morning. Okay, as we mentioned, the afternoon sacrifice, the Tamir, needs 2 extra priests to bring up the pieces of wood. And the Gemara asks maybe one priest could bring it up, maybe that would be enough. Again, as we mentioned, the different number of Kohanim mentioned here on 26. Again, remember we said the total number of priests in this lottery is 13, but sometimes it was 14 if it was Sukkot, or 15 on Shabbat, and 16 on Shabbat, which is Sukkot. With that, we complete that discussion. The next Mishnah on the end of 26 discusses different animals. First, we discussed different times of the year where you need different priests. Now we're going to talk about different animals, because they're larger, need more priests to carry up the limbs. So the Gemara here says that a ram needs 11 priests, that a bull actually needs 24 people. He is going to, right, the bull is much larger. You need more Kohanim, more priests to carry up the different limbs. From here, the Mishnah on the bottom of 26 ends with a statement that the flaying and the skinning of the sacrifice can be done by the same priest, and it can even be done by a non-priest, by a zar. From here, the Gemara at the bottom of 26 and then on to 27 now discusses the distinction, as we did mention at the beginning of this class, the things that could be done by someone who is not a priest. We know, again, if it's something that is an avodah, a service in the temple that is sanctified, it needs to be done by a priest, but maybe certain things could be done by a non-priest. So the Gemara explains that shchita, right, the slaughtering of the animal can be done by a non-priest, meaning it could be a Levi, it could be a Yisrael. Anybody can do shchita, which is interesting. If you think about it, one would think maybe the temple service needs to be from the beginning till the end only done by Kohanim, right? Only done by priests, right? Maybe we would think the temple area, and which is true, there are certain parts where only priests can walk, but there are other parts that have access to non-priests, and we see from here that they could do certain services. So at the top of 27, it says that the slaughter can be done by a non-priest. Everything else needs to be done by a priest. Or another opinion is that, as we mentioned just now, that the flaying of the animal, again, because maybe it's seen as maybe secondary to the sacrifice, and therefore a non-Kohen can do it. And from here, Daf 27 gets a little, I don't want to say complicated, but definitely very Gemara-y, in the sense that the Gemara is going to bring numerous verses to try to prove one way or another. Do things only have to be done by the priests? Can it be done by non-priests? And it goes through different proofs. So the Gemara says, well, there's a verse that says that the priests arrange the limb on the altar. Therefore, it must be that flaying the animal, which was not mentioned, doesn't need a priest. Or no, maybe what doesn't need a priest? The putting on of the wood onto the altar. And again, the Gemara is going to be, goes back and forth, right? Maybe things that are put on the altar, like the 2 blocks of wood, need to be done by priests. Maybe things done off of the altar, like the slaughtering and the flaying of the animal, could be done by a non-priest. And here there's an interesting line that the Gemara uses and says, any service, any avodah that's done at night uh, generally implies that it's not as important, and maybe it could be done by a non-Kohen, a non-priest. And then the Gemara is very careful to say, well, how do you define something that's done at night? Remember, we did this last week. The burning of the fats that can be done at night is really seen as a service of the day. The same thing as the removing of the ashes in the morning, the Trumat Hadeshen, even though we saw last week it could be done while it was still dark, it's still seen as a daytime service, and therefore all of these things need to be done by a Kohen, by a priest. Okay. The Gemara again at the bottom of 27 challenges if arranging the wood can be done at night or not. Maybe it can only be done during the day. And the Gemara says that if it was done at night, you should take it off and then put it back on. That makes it okay. And then there's a discussion about, again, a temple service that is a concluding service, which makes it more important, and therefore it should be done by a priest. From here, we're moving to the top of 28. And really, the Gemara concludes that if a non-Kohen arranges the wood, he's liable for death, and it must be done by a priest. Therefore, there is a lottery for it, and it is done by a priest and not by a non-priest. And with that, we conclude the second chapter of Masechet Yoma. And now we're going to go back to our original conversation, which was what happens throughout the day of Yom Kippur, right? We started at the beginning of the Masechet in the first chapter, the preparation already from a week before. We did the day before, we did the night, and now we're at the morning of Yom Kippur. In the beginning of the last chapter, we mentioned that the removal of the ashes was done in the middle of the night so that the priest won't get too tired. And now it is the morning. Well, first of all, how do we know that it's the morning? So the Gemara on 28 describes, again, there are no alarm clocks. There's no app that tells them what time is sunrise. There's no clock to tell them what time it is. So how do they know? And here, very dramatically, the Gemara, the Mishnah describes how they tell one priest to go up on the roof and see if it's time to slaughter the animal, to do the sacrifice. So they tell them to look at the eastern sky. Again, the sun rises in the east. And it says Barkai, right? Is it lit up? And they say, right, the sky is lit up. And then there's a conversation here with which the Gemara is going to try to clarify who's saying what. But the conversation is as follows: is the sky lit up? And then the answer is yes, or a statement: the sky is lit up. Till Hebron, is it all the way till Hebron, which is to the south of Jerusalem? And the answer is yes. And then the Mishnah asks, why did they have to go up on the roof? Right? If I could just open a window and look outside. And the Gemara describes a story that once they made a mistake, they looked out the window, or they looked up in the sky, I guess from ground level, and they saw light. They assumed it was the sun, but it was actually the moon, and they thought it was day. And in the end, they ended up bringing the Korban Tamid, the sacrifice, too early, basically at night, and they had to throw it out, and it was a whole big, it was a big problem. So therefore, you have to check, and you have to check very well. After this, then the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes to the Mikvah, and then here the Gemara says you should just know that if a priest moves his bowels, then he needs to go to the mikvah. If he only urinates, then he needs to wash his hands and his feet. And with that, we'll get a whole discussion about the bathroom and cleanliness a little bit later. Let's go to the Gemara on 28. So the Gemara says, well, we're talking about the sky being lit up. Is the sky just lit up a little bit, a lot? We know that it's early in the morning. So how much light do we need? So one idea is that there's this like shadow, or that it needs to be very lit. And from here, there's a discussion about the afternoon. The mincha, when is the korban tamid of mincha brought? Again, about telling time, since we're talking about knowing when the morning is. Now we're trying to figure out when is noon. And again, no clocks. So the Gemara says that it's when there's a shadow on the wall. That's how you know it's midday. And again, here there was a throwback to Masechet Pesachim when we learned about Erev Pesach that fell out on Friday and how they did everything early. And here again, they do it at 6 hours or 6.5 hours. So it reminds us about the Korban Pesach that was brought on a Friday afternoon. From here, there's a discussion about Avraham davening mincha, which is interesting because we usually discuss Avraham as the one who established the morning prayer. And here the Gemara says, no, Avraham also davened the afternoon prayer, though it was established by Yitzchak. How did he know, right? The Gemara says, Avraham knew exactly what time the middle of the day was, because he was so learned, right? The Gemara discusses that a zaken, an elder, doesn't only imply many years, right? Advanced in years, but advanced in intellect, someone who is learned, and therefore the Gemara says that all of the patriarchs were learned men, and therefore, right, even Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, was learned, and they all learned and knew Torah. Interesting here, the Gemara says on Daf 28 that Abraham kept the entire Torah. This is actually a very famous midrash, but this is the source. And not just the 7 commandments that are given to all humanity, but all 613 commandments, which, in case somebody's getting confused, were not yet given, right? We only received them later on. We're about to celebrate Shavuot, the time when we celebrate the receiving of the Torah on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai. But the Gemara here says that Avram actually either intuited the Torah or was given the mitzvot somehow, and therefore he kept the whole Torah. Okay, the Gemara now at the bottom of 28 asks, how do they confuse the moon and the sun? Interestingly enough, the Gemara says that the beam of the moon is very straight, whereas the beams of the sun kind of spread out. I meant to look this up, but I didn't. I wonder if there's a difference maybe of reflective light as opposed to sunlight. Yes, Aliza is saying yes. So that's interesting. So the Gemara says the rays of the moon are different than the rays of the sun. Therefore, you shouldn't be confused. The Gemara says, don't worry, it was a cloudy day. Or night. So if it was cloudy, it diffuses all the rays, and therefore it's really hard to differentiate between the rays of the moon and the rays of the sun. Okay, the Gemara at the top of 29 asks, there are, I'm skipping a little bit because there's just so much here, but there were some nice ideas where at the bottom of 28, the top of 29, that talked about like comparing the sun and the moon, right? Or the heat on a cloudy day versus the heat on a sunny day, and with really nice ways to remember it. So that was just nice. I'm not going to go through all of them. The Gemara on 29 mentions the concept of Ayelet HaShachar. It's a very, I don't know if it's very, but it's a name that people use. I know a few of them. Ayelet HaShachar is usually meant as, the rays of the morning. But the real words are, right, an ayala is a deer. So it is so that's the question. What are we talking about? Like the deer of the morning? What's going on? Even though, again, sorry, the literal term of Ayelet HaShachar are the rays of the morning. But the word is also used to refer to a deer. And here the Gemara discusses, what does a deer have to do with the morning? So the Gemara says that just like a deer's antler kind of spreads out as it grows, so too the rays of the sun spread out. So that's why it is likened to a deer. But from here, the Gemara discusses that this phrase is used in Tehillim Kaf Bet, in Psalms Perek 22. And that psalm is thought to be written by Esther. And then the Gemara says Esther is comparable or related to this Ayelet HaShachar, that she is the end, right? It's like the end of the night. So her time period is the end of great miracles. The Gemara explains, right? She is the latest. Right, the last time that miracles are recorded in the Tanakh. Again, the story of Hanukkah happens later, but it is not recorded in our canonized Bible, and therefore Esther symbolizes that end, like the end of the night. So too, the Gemara says that the prayers of the righteous are also like this Ayelet HaShachar, just like the antlers grow out, the prayers of righteous people spread out, and I guess are heard by God. Okay, the Gemara again says that the confusion of when it was day or night did not happen on Yom Kippur. It actually happened on another day, but because we're talking about what happens in the morning, the story was brought up. Here we have a statement on the bottom of 29 in terms of doing something at the wrong time, and can it be fixed? And basically the Gemara says, if you did what's called kmitza, removal of a handful of flour for the mincha, for the grain offering, if you did that at night, so then it doesn't have any way to make it better. It's actually invalid, and you have to start again. However, interestingly enough, if they would put the lechem hapanim, the showbread, on the shulchan, on the table, on the wrong day, and here again, we know that it was generally put on Shabbat. If they would have put it on the Sunday, they could leave the bread on for an extra week, and then it would be okay. So that was just interesting in terms of when does it become invalid and when is it valid. From here, the Gemara goes on to a discussion about washing your hands and feet after using the bathroom on the top of 30. Again, the Gemara talks about, I would say, sanitary, being sanitary, and you need to wash your hands and your feet after using the bathroom. And the Gemara then says that you can't say Shema, right? You can't pray if you have excrement somewhere on your body, or even coming actually out of your body as well. This is not a way to say Shema. Again, I think this is really about, I think this is about showing proper respect, again, for our prayers, for God, for the temple service. I think really that is the idea here. Okay, next Mishnah. We are talking about going to the mikvah, and here, second, I have one more picture. Oh no, two more pictures for you. Here we have a picture. This again is from that digitalized book of the temple service. Here's a picture of the Kohen when he goes to the mikvah. You can see here the mikvah was actually on the second floor. They would lift up a piece of fabric, a sheet, in order to maintain privacy. Again, that's very important. The Gemara discusses that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on Yom Kippur goes to the mikvah 5 times. We're going to go through each time, not today, but he's going to go 5 times, and he's going to wash his hands and his feet 10 times. So we are going to see how that happens. So the Gemara discusses why does the Kohen need to go to the mikvah all the time? We understand that when you go from a non-sanctified area to a sanctified area, you need to go to the mikvah. But even, says the Gemara, when he goes from one sanctified area to another, he still needs to go to the mikvah. So the Gemara explains that this is to remind you, or the priest, to keep checking, to be aware. Is he pure? Is he impure? Did he maybe touch something? He has to be very careful. And when he goes to the mikvah, that is a way for him to be reminded of this idea of being pure. The Gemara suggests maybe he doesn't really need to go all of these times, maybe only certain times, but it's there as a reminder. The question is, if he doesn't go, does he invalidate the service? So the Gemara says it does not invalidate the service. So therefore we see it's not integral, but it is suggested, and that was the custom, that he needs to go to the mikvah. And here the Gemara then brings up the mitzorah, the person with tzaraat, with leprosy, and it discusses how the person who had leprosy would come to the temple and stand here where the blue line ends, at the entrance. Remember Sha'ar Nicanor, the gates of Nicanor? He would stand there, and he would stick in his thumbs and his toe, or I should say his thumb and his toe and his ear, and that is where the priest would apply blood to these areas. And the Gemara discusses, right, does he need to go to the mikvah before he does this ceremony, right? Maybe it's enough that he went the night before, and maybe that would be okay. And then the Gemara says, no, even if he went the night before, he still needs to go during the day, and that is the difference of opinion on Daf 30. Again, here, is it about going to the mikvah the night before? Or the Gemara suggests maybe, again, it's about awareness. The person needs to be aware from the time he went to the mikvah till he gets to the temple that he has not come into any contact with impurity, right? So that awareness is very important. So the Gemara concludes that as long as there is awareness, the person does not need to go to the mikvah again. But if the person did not have awareness, what's called hesech hada'at, he lost, right? You lose your train of thought. You lose that being conscious and aware, then the person needs to go to the mikvah before entering the temple courtyard. And with this, I just want to conclude something just very interesting on my WhatsApp group with my group that I learn with. Someone posted that there was I guess what's going on. I don't know if everyone is aware of what's going on in Israel. It's getting a little tensions are growing, but someone said that there's a guard who guards a policeman who guards on the Temple Mount, and he actually told this person that every time he goes to duty, whenever he's on duty, he goes to the mikvah before going up on the Temple Mount. So just interesting to think about these, we're talking about these actions that were done, unfortunately, only, 2,000 years ago when we had a temple, but it is important to recognize that these things do have significance even nowadays. So just interesting that the policeman goes to the mikvah when he goes on duty on the Temple Mount, and people who do visit the Temple Mount, it has become popular recently to, again, not this week, but in general, to visit the Temple Mount. That has to be done with certain, I would say, Jewish ritual guidelines. One of those things is going to the mikvah before going up. So this concept of awareness of purity and impurity and going to the mikvah is still alive and well even nowadays. So with that, I thank you very much. Wishing everybody a good week. As we say, Bisorot Tovot, we should just have good news, and may things calm down very quickly. So wishing everybody a good week. Shavua Tov, everyone. We will have class. We will have class. Oh, next week outside you still have. Is it still the festival?
It is here.
Yes. Okay. I'll get back to you. Would you prefer doing it on Wednesday night next week so that you can be those of you who are keeping the
It's okay.
Okay. We can okay. I'll get back to you. If someone has a preference, feel free to email me. I am available on either night. So I'm happy to either record it on Tuesday night for those of you in Israel, or do it live on Wednesday for those of you outside. So if you have a preference, let me know, and I'll get back to you. Stay tuned. I'll send out an email, Bezrat Hashem, on Sunday to let you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye. Thank you.